inspired you to write a book?
I think for me it was oh Lordy. I think for me it was when I kind of came into my own, like when I found out that I was HIV positive in 2006. I went on medication in 2008, and I didn't see any other African Americans like chronologically in their life living with HIV. You saw coming out stories online, but they weren't really like saying this is what I have to deal with and like making a whole video journal of it. Not a lot of African Americans were doing that because it's a very stigmatized thing within the African American community. So when I started doing it, I would, have journal entries all the time, and then I said, okay, so now that I've done this, what else can I do? I'm always constantly kind of reinventing myself in a certain way, saying, okay, so what else can I do to serve my community? What's the best thing I can do for that right now? Okay, the best thing I could do is educate. How do we educate? We write books. Who reads books? Children. To be able to educate early is to be able to broaden the horizons of adults. So I said to myself, what kind of book could I write? And I said, I'll write a children's book about HIV because I felt as though a lot of the times, children are educated on HIV because nobody wants. There's still a stigma to actually explaining what it is because it has such a bad stigma to people that are infected with HIV. It has such a, oh my God, this person did something bad, so this was their punishment. So if we tell our children not to think that way, if we start early in education, then that will definitely decrease the stigma of people living with HIV.
Could you share part of the book that you wrote?
Sure, sure. So this is the book, I Have a Secret. It's the second edition. The first edition sold out, which was amazing. So this is the second edition. Okay, I can read maybe one or two pages. Hi, my name is Jay, and I have a secret. I start school in the fall, and I'll be in sixth grade. One day, my dad said we would have to move into another city, and I would have to go to a different school. I didn't know what to do. I was so scared and excited all at the same time. When moving day came, my dad helped me pack all my things. He then sat me down with a concerned look on his face and said, Jay, you have to know I love you, and I just want you to be safe. This is the illustration of Jay here. I know, Dad. What's wrong? I replied. Nothing, son. It's just that the kids at the new school might not know about your secret. They may not have all the information about it. I know, Dad. It'll be our little secret. When school began, I made friends with my very first day. I met two boys, Charles and Bobby. Charles, Bobby, and I had recess, gym, band, and health together. We often had secrets together that we wouldn't tell a soul. So that's Jay, Charles, and Bobby. So this is the last page that I read. After my first day at school, I talked with my dad and asked, Dad, why do I have to keep my secret? Because I have to keep you safe, he exclaimed. There are people out there that will want to hurt you if they found out your secret. They might not let you go to school with them. Or worse, they may not want to be your friend anymore. But Dad, it's my choice, I said. No, it's not. That's my final answer. You will not tell anyone. Now go to your room. And that's Jay in his room crying. So I will leave the rest to your readers if they want to definitely purchase the book and read the rest.
Do you find the content of this video valuable? Awesome. Well, drop a like. It helps the channel. Consider subscribing. And we're also a 501c3 nonprofit, and we rely on taxable donations like yours to continue providing you quality content like this, along with our programming. Consider making a donation today. We appreciate it in advance. Now back to the video.
Living with HIV yourself and being a survivor, and then also a person of color, being of African American descent. What was it like for you to divulge this to your primary care provider or providers, and what type of stigmas or obstacles or barriers that you had to come through as a survivor just to get the type of care that you needed, specifically just to treat HIV.
Well, I will say this: when I was infected, they decided not to put me on medication and for another 3 years because my body was dealing with it, I guess, well enough at that point in time. You have to understand that this was back in 2006. So now when they find out that somebody is infected with HIV, they actually put them on medication immediately. So back then they did not do that. I told my doctor, I said, hey, so I know that, I told you I have somebody I'm seeing right now who's a guy, but I also do have an interest in females too, sexually. And, I need to know like certain things. And so basically he treated me as if I had no interest in females. He just said, yeah, whatever. And he just said, basically, I believe it's called bi erasure. And I didn't really get to have those kind of conversations with my doctor. And then also at that time it was condoms, 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 condoms. So that's all I had, the whole thing about trying to be, I think that for me, it's because the gay community dealt with HIV, it's in such a way that having sex with men for me was a lot easier than actually having sex with females, because I would be open about what I had. I had no problem with being open about having HIV. But the thing is, when I was open with male partners, it was like, they were like, oh, okay. Like sometimes I got rejected, but most of the time it was like, okay, so let's protect ourselves. Let's have a conversation about it. With females, there was no conversation. It was no. It was like there was nothing I could do. It was like no. So that was kind of like the stigma that I faced. It was basically within the healthcare system and also on the outside of trying to find a partner, as you will. So it was kind of like, okay, so I faced stigma with having interpersonal relationships and also within the healthcare system, which was which I will say was hard, because I don't know, people, it's a lot of times it was just like, no, there was no not a lot of people were educated on it. And I realized that now that I'm in a different part of the country, not a lot of people here are educated on it either. So it's like almost like when I lived in the DC area, yeah, education was pretty much like, people knew and people became, it's like as time went on, people became more educated on it. And then when I moved to New Mexico, it was a lot of times they wouldn't read profiles or say, oh, you have HIV. I'm like, yeah. Oh, I didn't see that. I'm like, yeah. And of course I'm like, so yeah, it's better if we just don't. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. All right, no problem. And it doesn't hurt my feelings anymore. I just pretty much look at them like, that's fine. and then when they say, I'm so sorry, I'm like, there's no need to apologize. I have enough pride in myself to be able to walk away from you and not really feel as though that I need to prove anything for you or to you. There's nothing I need to prove anything to anyone but myself. So honestly, my inner strength is like, screw you, dude. I don't really give a shit. Sorry. I mean, keep your apology. I don't really need it.
And that leads me into my next question, which goes into your first anthology, Cornbread, Fish, and Collard Greens. You've been a survivor for over 33 years, so you've had, your story along with multiple other stories of HIV survivors. I'm just curious to know, how was that process, and I know it must have been very cathartic for you, being a person living with HIV and dealing with medical developments of different treatments over the years. How was that process, as you as a survivor are dealing with this, and then getting other survivors to be able to share their voice whether it was through poetry or prayers or even affirmations.
Yeah, it's interesting because these ideas for these projects come to me, and I never really considered myself a great writer or editor. But during the process of editing Cornbread, I actually had some help by a woman named Catherine Zagrath, who is a wonderful editor and writer and poet herself. But she gave me some wonderful tips on editing, and it really taught me how to approach editing. But the Cornbread came about pretty much the same way as Sister Speak. I had the idea, I developed a call for submissions, and I started submitting calls for submissions like everywhere. Cornbread, turns out, has 127 different contributors, and they are from around the world, from the continent of Africa, from the continent of Asia, from the United Kingdom, from South America, and they're all in their indigenous language, the English translation. But for me, when I went about doing it, I couldn't tell my story and share my story without the collective community being a part of the storytelling, or part of the sharing. And so for me, it was cathartic being able to write some of the things that I wrote for Cornbread were things that I guess had been sitting in my heart, and I finally had a chance to get it out. But also the contributions from other people and reading their contributions really gave me a real sense of feeling really that the project, I never thought that I'd make money off the project, which I haven't. But I know what the project has done for the individuals who have written contributions. I know what it has done for myself, and I know what it's done for people who have gotten a hold of copies of Cornbread and read it. And I'll just share a couple of stories. There was one gentleman who reached out to me who said that his partner had died the year before, and the day Cornbread showed up at his house was a year to the day his partner had died. And when he opened the book up and started reading, flipping through and started reading, he could do nothing but be filled with joy, because there was somebody who understood his partner's experience and his partner's journey, and that he had that to hold on to with Cornbread. There have been other people who have gotten a hold of Cornbread who lived in these rural areas, who have no support groups, who have very isolated lives with their diagnosis, and have gotten a hold of Cornbread, and it's been their saving grace, because even though they haven't told anybody, they still haven't shared with anybody, they have a place to go to read something daily to help support them in living. And so that's what Cornbread has done, and I'm excited about.
What are some of the different biases you've had to deal with being a person of color, being bisexual, and living with HIV? What are some of the different biases and stigmas that you've gone through, throughout your life, that you don't mind sharing with the audience?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones is that as a bisexual man living with HIV, that I've been the cause of the rising rates of HIV among Black women, which is just simply untrue and not true. And research has been done to prove that it's not true. That because I'm bisexual, I'm promiscuous, because I'm bisexual is the reason why I got HIV, because I'm this, could be considered the stereotypical Black man who is all about sex. Because when people hear bisexual, what they hear is sex, and don't disconnect my identity with the actual behavior, which is really disheartening. I have, as a Black man, I have had so many different experiences with biases and issues around race, issues around phobias, biphobia, bi-erasure, and also dealing with people's just altogether attitudes and their misconceptions about who I am as a person, who I am as a man, who I am as someone who's living with HIV, who I am as someone who is of color. And so I'm 56 now, and I have found a place and space in my mind and in my heart and in my being to not let those things affect who I am in my life. I think years ago, those things had a great effect on how I looked at myself. But I've gotten past those things, and how I look at myself is how I want to, how I look at myself now. And for the past many years has been that I'm a gift. I have talents and gifts, and it's been a privilege to be able to share those talents and gifts through the work that I do.